Hi, my name is Erica, creator of TsundEri, the YouTube channel about anything and everything having to do with anime. And welcome to my podcast, Nerds at Work with TsundEri, where I interview fellow nerds who turn their passions into thriving careers or use their nerdiness to carve their own unique space in their industry. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce my second guest, Dr. Kelli Dunlap. Dr. Dunlap is a clinical psychologist, game designer, educator, and self proclaimed gaming nerd. She has managed to combine her love for video games with her passion for mental health in order to help her clients, as well as develop mental health resources for gamers and streamers, and consult with game developers on mental illness in games such as portrayals, content warnings, and ethics. Dr. Dunlap's expertise has been featured in the New York Times, Variety, Vice, Business Insider, and more. So without further delay, Dr. Dunlap, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Would you prefer that I call you like Dr. Dunlap, Dr. Kelly, like
No, no, Kelly. Please call me Kelly.
Kelly? Okay.
Yes.
So to make sure.
Yeah, I
So
only make people I don't like call me doctor. So,
okay, so we'll keep that in mind.
yeah.
So the first question that I always ask every guest on here is what does being a nerd mean to you? For me, being a nerd just means being really passionate about something to the point where you're just so excited to talk about it. You spend a lot of time like diving into it and it's a big part of who you are. So what does being a nerd mean to you?
My first instinct is to go to, well, technically, the origin of the word nerd, and that is literally my level of nerdiness, is I have looked up the origins of the word nerd versus geek versus other things to see what they mean and where they come from. And I think that that curiosity, that wanting to understand something at a very deep level and then share that passion with other people, that is quintessential nerddom.
And it's like the best thing when you find people that like really want to like that want to share that with you. Like I love when I don't know, I like make like an offhand anime reference and someone's like, "You've seen that anime?" And I'm like, "Yes. Do you want to talk about it?" And then yeah. So like it's always fun just to find other people that have that same curiosity.
Absolutely. I do love myself a cross stitch now and then. And I found a Reddit thread called Nintendo Stitch. And so they are all cross stitches and embroidery of Nintendo and video games
That's
more
so
broadly, but
cool.
like there's just cross stitched Pikachus everywhere and crocheted, just war turtles, and it makes me so happy because that's such a weird intersection that I think without the internet I probably would never find was people who love video games and nerdery, but also want to cross stitch it.
That's like the best thing about the internet. Like there's a niche for everything. I recently started doing a video series for my channel where I talk about like cat themed manga in particular because I love cats. In fact, you probably hear like little sounds in the background that's them eating. Um, but like I love cats and I love manga. And when I made the videos, I was like, no one's gonna watch this. And then it's actually like one of my highest performing videos. I'm like, oh my gosh, y'all love cats too? Like this is perfect. Like it's just you never know what you're gonna find online. And sometimes it's a really good thing when you
Yes,
get to
yes.
find like
Oftentimes we talk about the way that's a bad thing, but it can often be a very good thing too.
exactly. So I want to dive a little bit into just like your love of video games first. So one of my questions is, you received your first video game console. Now, mind you, I am not much of a gamer, so I'm going to say this wrong. The Sega Master System was your first video game console that you got when you were
Yes.
3 weeks old.
Yeah,
Three
so it
weeks.
obviously wasn't for me, but I have an older brother, and, so it was for him, although it ended up in my parents' bedroom, and they played it extensively, so I'm really not quite sure who it was for, but yeah, there has not been a time in my life where there has not been a video game console present.
Do you remember the first game you ever played?
Oh, geez, I don't, um, but some of the earliest like, for sure, some of the earliest memories I have are of playing, The Lion King on the Sega Genesis, which, if you've played that, you know the struggle of the wildebeest and the ape throwing coconuts, and I never beat it. But I can clearly remember, like, that being one of my first struggles. The Sonic games, I definitely played a ton of those. But on the Master System, my parents had a game called Teddy Boy, and that was what I grew up watching them play. It's like a really retro old school platformer. Your little dude with a little pew pew gun shooting weird things, and it just um so my guess is that probably stealing that controller from my parents at some point was probably my first game, but the ones I can remember would be Sonic and The Lion King.
I definitely remember the Lion King one. Like you unlocked like a core memory. That and like there was like this old like Tarzan game from way back in the day too that we used to play when I was a kid.
Yes. Oh,
That
and
game
of
was
course,
hard.
I absolutely feel like a total game failure now because I know the name, and, like, one of the
Oh, the
classes I
Tarzan
teach.
game?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I literally just
Unless
call
you're
it the
talking about
Tarzan game.
one of the classes I teach is video game history, and so my students are gonna be super bummed that I'm, like, missing this quintessential name for this super old retro Atari game that was, like, about Tarzan. It'll come to me later, and I'll just randomly shout out a random word, and people will think I'm strange. But that's okay, I'm cool with that.
Feel free. Listen, we're all a little weird here. This is like nerds at work. We're nerds. It's all good. So what led to you? So this is kind of like a twofer question. So like, what led to your passion for mental health, and how did you make that connection between video games and mental health? Was it like a like did you have like a aha moment, or was it something that happened like gradually?
So the mental health was kind of by accident, that side of things. I went to school in undergrad. I wanted to study Russian language and culture. Like that's what I wanted to do. I went to school in Washington D.C. I had it in my head I was going to be Sydney Bristow from Alias. I was going to be a spy, and so I was learning all of that. And then the school was like, "Oh, by the way, we're extending the year, so you'll have to spend another year in college." And I was like, "Hmm, no, nope, can't do that." And so I switched my
Mhm.
major to psychology. I had taken one course at that point, and I had loved it. And so I swapped after 2 years of Russian, and I started doing psych, and just really enjoyed it. Um, it
What a
was one of those
leap!
things.
That's such a leap.
Yeah, yeah, I can't explain it. 20-year-old Kelly was much more adventurous than I am now, a lot braver in some ways, and but yeah, I just enjoyed it, and for anybody who had the dorm experience, there's always that dorm mom who you, like, bring your problems to, and somehow that ended up being me, and so it just kinda made sense of, like, "Okay, people are already bringing me their problems, why don't I kinda figure out what to do with that in a better way?" And then that is about where the aha moment of that video games and mental health passion happened for me, because I was very much a hardcore player. I played I think it's 34 days straight worth of time playing Halo 2. So, like, if you took all the time I played playing Halo 2 and you smush it all together, it's like 34 straight days of just hundreds and hundreds of hours of playing. And so it was something that my dorm mates and I did together. We came together, we had LAN parties, we were part of the gaming club and we beat George Washington University. I'm still so proud of that. We slayed them in Halo. It was fantastic. I won the tag team championship at the AU Gamers with my now husband. He wasn't my husband then, but he is now. So I guess he kind of wormed his way into my heart through that. And yeah, just this love, this intense love of games as a way to bring people together and have something for us to celebrate. And at the time, so my undergrad was mid 2000s, and all of the research at the time was that games were bad for you, that they were violent and they would make you violent and they rotted your brain and they were just a waste of time. And that was just so antithetical to everything I had experienced through games. My brother and I played, my parents and I played. Like, my parents are ferocious card sharks. Do not play cards with them. It will not, unless you want to cry. And then, so games have always just been this really important part of my life, and so just the idea that it was on an Xbox and not with cards, or you were a cybernetically enhanced super soldier master chief as opposed to a speeding blue hedgehog, it was just so weird. And so I was like, fine, I'll do my capstone research on this. And I did. And nobody in the department liked it. My chair threatened to abandon me. That was great. Not a lot of trauma
Really?
going on here at all. No, no. Um, but I got through, and I made a study. I did not get it published because, again, I had no support, and what undergrad knows how to publish anything? Really didn't. But basically, what I found was that when people played video games that they liked, their stress and their anger and the frustration went down. And when they played games that were new to them, frustration, anger, and those indicators like blood pressure went up. And so it was a matter of, oh, okay, this is a learning curve. This like spike in aggression that you're seeing in the research, it's a learning curve. My Xbox controller has like what, 17 buttons? And if the game is frustrating, of course you're going to see frustration. But I had
Mhm.
somebody, I had participants who would play, oh gosh, the E-rated game I had them play was like Penguin Rush. It was a penguin surfing game for kids. And that had one of the highest levels of stress. And my participants, because nobody had played it, and they're like, I don't know what to do. Whereas people sat down and play, a shooter like Halo, but if they were familiar with it, they're like, "Oh, this is fun. This is my relaxation. This is my jam." And so, yeah, that was my aha moment of wait a minute. It doesn't all have to be this way. There are ways of explaining these findings that doesn't mean that video games are evil. And so anybody who graduates with an undergrad in psychology knows that you can't do anything with an undergrad in psychology. And so that's what brought me to grad school to do the same thing.
It's so interesting because like you actually like I that was some of the questions I was going to ask you, which was I think it was I was going to ask you if like throughout your studies and your career if you had received pushback for, trying to integrate video games with mental health and making that connection, how you navigated that. And the fact that they didn't want to back you, I was like, "Oh, wow."
Yeah, so pretty much every step along the way in my educational career, I have gotten pushback. So at the undergraduate level, they were like, "This isn't real science, so go away." And that was kind of heartbreaking, but I'm stubborn and tenacious, and I don't really care. So I just kept on doing it because it was important to me. And then when I got to grad school, I entered a PsyD program, so Doctor of Clinical Psychology program, and the pushback there wasn't so much this is wrong, but it was if you want to study games, you have to do it through a lens of addiction and violence. Otherwise, nobody will take you
Mhm.
seriously and you will get blacklisted and you will never get a job. And I had my advisor for my dissertation, which was on video games and mental health. He was a gamer himself. And so I mean, not the hours and hours competitive like I was, but he at least understood what video games were and he was supportive. But
Mhm.
his warning to me was if you continue to pursue video games and mental health and you're trying to make the argument that games can actually benefit people's health, I believe the term he used was career suicide.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and that came from a place of care, like, he wanted to protect me. Um, but again, headstrong and stubborn, and I did it anyway. I published, my dissertation, and then I tried to get a postdoc, and I could not get a postdoc. Nobody would hire me because nobody wanted to supervise somebody who would do work with games. There was no one who wanted to put their license on the line to supervise a becoming researcher and support what I was doing. So, as is the way, when you finish a 5-year doctoral program, you take 4 months and then you go into a master's program. So, that's what I did. I finished my doctorate and I got a scholarship to go do a
Mhm.
master's in game design at American University. And so it was kind of the exact opposite. Whereas in doctor grad school, I was always, hey, here's something about Freud. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about how Freud's id, ego, and superego can be represented by Master Chief Cortana and and not the didact, that's Halo 5. Like, sorry, and the Covenant. Let's talk
Mhm.
about those things. You want me to use CBT? All right, let's talk about cognitive reframing in Mario, he can always do it. He can always, push through and there's persistence and all these other things. And whereas my game design program, I never thought that was so weird. And in my game design program, it was okay. I have to make a game. I'm going to make it about psychology. So I took
Mhm.
Jenga and I adapted it to be mental health Jenga. So like you're pulling things, like these are your resources that you're having extracted, and of course you build it up, which brings out a sense of anxiety if you play Jenga because the higher it gets,
Yes.
the more holes there are in your structure, the more shaky things are. And sometimes the tiles would have words on them. And that was like, okay, you now have to pull through more tiles because something bad happened to you. And, so I just found this way of continually bringing what I knew into these different spaces that were lacking that. So the games place was super, super supportive of my research stuff, of my psychology stuff. I can't code to save my life. I can't draw. So when it comes to game development, not always the most useful person in the room. But when it came to, okay, well, how do we figure out if people are enjoying what they're doing? How do we design in a way to get people's attention? And I'd go, oh, well, I had a class in neuropsych and I know that the human eye is attracted to movement. So if you want someone to pay attention to something, make it move, make it sparkle, make it
Mhm.
shimmer, give it an effect so that it will draw attention. And that's how people can navigate your spaces better. And so it's just this beautiful mixture of what I knew as a psychologist and then what I now know as a game designer and just finding ways to bring those things together. But yeah, the pushback is to this day, to this day, I have fellow psychologists who are like, I don't know what you do. Aren't games evil and bad for you? And how can you study that? And how can you want to do that? Like, "Well, how much time do you have?" Because I have this lovely slide deck of about 300 slides where I can talk to you about the research and what's going on, and yeah, so I think that probably more than answers the question. Um, but
It's
yeah, so
so interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead. I will talk forever, so please redirect.
No, this is all it's so interesting because for me personally, I'm not much of a gamer. I've always been the person. I would play a little bit when I was younger, but I enjoyed like watching
Mhm.
because for me, I have very little patience. So if I keep like losing, I tried playing Skyrim when I was in college because
Yeah.
I had a boyfriend that played. And I liked the idea that I could like he had all these different mods so you could make your character look as close to you as possible. So I did that and I kept losing and I just
Mhm.
watched myself die like 50 million different ways.
Yeah,
I was set on fire. I think I got eaten by wolves. I
probably.
fell off cliffs so many times. Like and
Trolls.
but
Yeah.
yeah, oh, listen. They had an agenda against me.
You're trying to
But
steal their cheese. You're trying to steal their mammoth cheese, and they won't tolerate it.
truly. And but like, it's I've always grown up with like a lot of gamers. Like my brother is a huge gamer. I've had like boyfriends that were really into gaming. My sister, she denies it now, but when she was younger, she was a big gamer. And she was the one that we would bring in, like if we couldn't defeat something, we would like go get Nene, go get her right now. Tell her to stop whatever she's doing. She got to come in here.
Oh, I
and
love
but it
that.
was so because of that, I never really saw, I would see my brother get frustrated with a game sometimes. Like you said, like if a game was really stressful, then like he would be stressed. But I never got like that. I never understood that connection that people always made between video games and violence because to me it was kind of like I had a therapist that told me, but this might not be the best analogy, but we had been talking about like drinking and stuff and like I don't really drink much and she had told me she was like something that people don't understand is that whatever you're feeling before you drink, that's what you're going to feel the most like as you get more drunk. And then she had said that sometimes with video games or like or not or at least that's not what she like not the video game part, but for me the connection I made is that like sometimes if you're already stressed out because you keep losing or you keep like you're gonna get more stressed if you're having like a good time already and you're playing like I
Mhm.
don't know, Animal Crossing. I've never seen someone go on a murderous rampage after Animal Crossing. It really just depends I mean, I don't know, maybe, but I haven't seen it. But I think it just depends on like I think it's like whatever, for me, what I've seen is that it's really just whatever you're already dealing with. That's what you bring into it already. Like, am I making sense? You're a
Yeah,
psychologist.
no,
Doesn't that
I
make
I
sense?
I got you. It's just a perpetuation of your current mood state. Pitfall. That is the name of the entire game I was thinking of. Pitfall. I got this.
Okay.
Little
You
brain
know
a
what?
little
Actually,
overslept.
it's all good. So that kind of brings me into like another question. You kind of touched on this earlier. So I had been creeping on your website and all your different interviews, trying to make sure I'm prepared. And I saw that you had said that you found that when it comes to video games, at least let me go back to my notes so I can make sure I say this right. Um, you had said that in graduate school you touched on this. In grad school you integrated video games into any assignment you could, and your dissertation essentially examined the impact of games on mental health over time.
Mhm.
And you said that you had noticed that it doesn't matter what people played or for how long, it mattered like why. So can you like you kind of touched on it a little bit, but can you like dive a little bit more into that?
Sure. So the study itself, I thought was fascinating because nerd. But there back in the day, there was a service called Raptor, which if you signed into, it was kind of like a social platform, and it would actually track the hours that you spent playing. It would track your achievements and things like that. So research up until that point had all been self-report, like tell me how depressed you are on this rating scale, and then tell me how many hours you play. Well, when you're playing a game, one of the whole points is that sense of immersion, that sense of flow, that loss of time. And people are terrible at estimating time, no matter what they're doing, but especially when they're having fun. And so that's always been a huge problem. And so what I did was I didn't have to ask people, how long did you play and what did you play? And you didn't have to remember. I just looked. They opted into this platform. They let me track them and creep on them for 30 days. And then I got that information. And then I compared it to a bunch of mental health questionnaires that I had digitized. And so I surveyed about 300 people at time one and then 30 days later. So I could see, if video games are making people more miserable, I should see some kind of change in these, label, what we call label states, things that can change. So like
Mhm.
stress, I would expect someone who played more to be more stressed than when they were playing less. But what I found was that the amount of time, no impact. Whether someone played 5 hours or 40 hours, there was no impact whatsoever on their mental health, whether what they self-reported, their quality of life, anything like that. And so that was super interesting. The other thing that I found was that what it didn't matter what they were playing. So whether it was a shooter or a puzzle game, it didn't matter at all. What really connected someone's mental health to their gameplay was the reason that they played. And
Mm.
so, for example, people who played with the intention of hanging out with their friends. Like, I'm gonna log on. I know for myself, I have a weekly Halo match that I play with my buddies who live all over the world, and we get on every Saturday and we have our Halo, and that's the point. Win or lose, whatever. This is our way of staying connected. And
Mhm.
so when people did something like that, no issue. Their mental health was stable or improved. The more they played, the more they got to socially connect. However, if that was the only place they found social connection, like I play video games because it's the only place where I can have social interaction. Maybe that's because of anxiety. Maybe that's because of isolation, like geographically. Maybe their neighborhoods aren't safe. Like there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't be able to be as free socially. And so if the only place they could find any kind of social support was online, then you did see a negative shift in their mental health. But that, of course, makes a lot of sense because if the only place you have friends is in a digital space, it's really, really challenging to have like you can't be online all the time. You are going to have to go to school. You are going to have to go to work. You are going to socialize in these spaces where you don't have those supports. And so that was a really big indicator. Another one was this idea of escapism. Escapism gets a really bad rap as if, oh, you're just escaping into a video game. Well, you escape into a good book and no one's saying that there's something wrong with you. And that's very much the same here. If you are going in because you want to relax, I've had a stressful day at work, I just want to blow stuff up. I'm blowing off steam, no issue. People going in to like find a relaxing to whatever it is they need, great. But if they are doing it as a way to avoid real life issues. So instead of I've had a stressful day at work, I'm going to blow off steam, it's, I've had a stressful day at work and I probably should actually go talk to my therapist about it. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to go play Skyrim or I'm just going to go play GTA. So it's kind of like a substitute for addressing important issues. You also see a negative correlation there. So yeah, it's the term is escapism, that you are trying to avoid the things that you have to do in your daily life. But keep in mind, I don't know a single person who would rather do the dishes than go play a video game. I don't know anybody who would rather do their laundry than like sit down and play Wordle. So it's not that. It's to the extent that it is detrimental to your life. And that's always that bar. And as a clinician, that's the bar that's out there too, is you can play and do whatever you want with games, but if it's not hurting you and it's not hurting anybody else,
Mhm.
that's really the crux of it.
Would you say it's like it's less about, the video game itself and more so about, some people just don't really have like, healthy coping mechanisms,
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like some people, I don't know, for example, I knew someone who like just like me, like loved anime. I loved
Mhm.
anime. I love anime. I watch it all day. But, I still go to work. I still get my bills paid. I still
Mhm.
run my errands, clean my apartment, do the things I have to do to maintain, a decent life. But I knew this person, they were going through a lot of stuff at the time, and they would just watch anime all day and literally not do anything else to, like you said, like their detriment. And it's like, okay, well, I know it's not the anime's fault. like like,
No.
you know, Yu-Gi-Oh didn't do this. This man is just, he's going through some stuff right now, and so he needs that escapism, but he's not really having like you said, like a healthy coping mechanism for it. So yeah, and it goes. I think it's like whatever the person puts into it is what they're gonna get out of it. It's not necessarily the game's fault. Would you agree?
So the way I always talk about it with my students, is that games are a play space, and when we're in a play space, we try to get our needs met. And so, oftentimes, if you're angry, you don't play an angry game. Oftentimes, you will go play something that's not angry, or a way to dispel the anger. Like you're not trying to make yourself more angry; you're actually trying to do the opposite. So if I've had a really hard brain week and my brain is mush, I'm not going to try and play a game that is super strategy heavy. I'm going to go play some Disney Dreamlight Valley where there's just wholesome. And if I want to sit there and water my crops, that's all I have to do. No one is asking anything of me. And so when people go into game spaces, they are seeking something. Sometimes it's a lot of times, most time it's play. We're seeking play, especially as adults, we're not allowed to play. And so guess what? Humans need to play to be healthy. And adults find a way to make that work. And right now, the easiest way to get our adult play needs met is through games. And that's what's so important is that if you think about games as getting needs met. So for your friend with anime, his needs was to not deal with the horrible things that was going on with his life, and he found a way to distract himself. Is that a coping skill? Absolutely. Is it a healthy coping skill? Not necessarily. Does it mean that anime is addictive? Absolutely not. It's just that's the tools that he had at that moment. And so what he needed were some more tools, and he needed a break is what he needed.
Yeah,
And anime
exactly.
gave him that break.
I think sometimes people forget, like, adulthood is hard. We want to play too. Like you think I want to pay bills all day? You think I want to go grocery shopping and work and deal with traffic and all this other stuff and take my cats to the vet and then take myself to the doctor? No, sometimes I just want to sit down and just not think of anything. And in
Yeah.
college, there was one game that definitely ruled my life in college. It was I think it was like the first like Injustice game. It was like they had Justice League meet
Ooh,
Mortal
yeah,
Kombat,
yeah.
and during exams, my boyfriend at the time, he knew when I was just in the trenches and I was just not having a good time because he would come home and I had like this oversized hoodie that I had had for like 10 years at that point, and if he saw me just in the oversized hoodie playing like as Catwoman, just not even saying anything, just like fighting for
Mhm.
like hours, he's like, "Oh yeah, she had a long day. Exams were kicking her butt." Like, you know.
Yeah, and
So it was so like, okay.
that's the beautiful thing is that that's not you doing nothing. If you're playing Injustice, that is a button masher to be sure, but, like, there's a whole different part of your brain that you're engaging. And so if most of your day is spent heavy focus, very serious, intense work, deadlines, stress, pressure, it makes sense that you want to dress up as Catwoman in a little plastic leather onesie and go around and beat up people. And it's not that nothing is happening. It's not junk food for your brain. Absolutely not. You are engaging totally wildly different parts of your brain. You're engaging your playful self, your creative self, your problem solving self. You are being adventurous and curious, and you're trying new things, and your visual spatial processing skills are getting a chance to shine because it's a 3D world, and that's a whole other skill set than staring at a paper all day. And so it's your way of like finding nourishment for your brain that's not being given in other sectors. Now again, that is fine in moderation. And that's always the thing that I try to tell parents is like, you know, if your child reads a book and they are lost in their book and they have to be called down for dinner 5 times, no one calls that book addiction. No one blames the book as long as it's a book that they think is okay. But if that person reading a book doesn't wash, doesn't do their homework, doesn't come down for dinner, stops hanging out with all of their friends and begins to shut down, they're having a problem. And right now, the only coping tool they have that seems to work for them is this book, whatever that is. But it's not book addiction. It's the book
It's
being
something
used
else.
as a coping strategy. Again, doesn't mean it's a healthy one, but it's working for them. So
Mhm.
as a clinician, I lean into that. There's something about this, whether it's anime or a book or a video game, there's something about that is bringing you a sense of relief, that is bringing you a sense of joy. Let's figure out what that is and see how we can bring that into your other life, the life outside of the game or outside of the book. And I swear, if one more person says a shot of dopamine, I literally have a bingo card. And if I drank, I would do shots, but then I would never be sober, because that's not a thing. Like that's if anybody says that, they don't really understand how dopaminergic pathways work. Yes, there's dopamine release, but there's also dopamine release when you eat a potato. So understanding that our brains reward things that feel good. And sometimes when you're really, really down, you need to remind your brain that it is possible to feel good.
That's lovely. I never even really saw it that way with all like the different parts of like that a game can engage you, like that you might not get engaged elsewhere. That's like really interesting. And also it brings in my next question, which is like,
Sure.
we talked about games as like a coping mechanism. How exactly do you use games with your clients to help them process whatever is like, whatever they're going through?
Sure. So as the ethical clinical side, I all of these examples are theoretical and general.
Mhm. Yes.
As a clinician, I can't actually give examples, even if I disguise the person's name without their consent. So always super, super important to me as someone who practices but also does media stuff to be very clear that these are examples and not actually of a client. But there's a couple different ways I use games. One is just I know games. Like knowing them is half the battle. If I'm working with somebody who says like who really likes Pokemon, we'll say Pokemon. The fact that they don't have to explain to me what Pokemon is, and then I can ask them really important questions like, okay, so if I'm working with a younger client who likes Pokemon, well, every Pokemon has an evolution that they go through when they go through something difficult, when they go through a challenging time. What does your challenging time look like, and what would your evolution look like? Here, and if they're small, like draw for me what you look like as your Pokemon now, and what they look like after, and what is their strength now, and what's their strength after. So you're literally using clinical skills, but you're framing it through the lens of something they like. So whether that is Pokemon or Minecraft or anime, whatever it is, you pull for that because you're letting the client lead you. This is something that's interesting, so I'm going to find a way to use that door. Another way is I'll like prescribe video games. One of my favorite is called Adventures with Anxiety, and it is by a person named Nikki Chase. Sorry, Nikki Case. There we go. It's a web-based browser game, and it's funny. It is sarcastic and funny. It is not for children. Definitely want to be high school or older to play this game. But basically, you play as the anxiety. You're an anthropomorphized wolf, and your job is to keep your humans safe. And so the idea here is, as a clinician, I'm like, this is awesome. We're externalizing anxiety. We're talking about its purpose in the body. Its purpose is to keep us safe. But if our anxiety is overzealous, then it's not really helping us. It's like a fire alarm going off when there's no fire. And so, but you play as this wolf of like, well, if you don't go to that party, then you will have social death, and then you'll die. And it's so sarcastic and funny, and it gives you a language for talking about anxiety that's not scary and that's not clinical. And so I'll use examples like those so that my clients and I can actually have conversations, and I can ask things like, so how was your anxiety wolf today? What was your anxiety wolf warning you about? So now we have a shared language for talking about something. Plus, it gives them a little more education around, like what anxiety is. And then on the rare occasion, I have done co-play. This was obviously pre-pandemic. I'm only telehealth at the moment. But in the before times, like I would sit down in the room and play with a client. So whether that was an Xbox game or a mobile game or whatever, I have had them bring in DSs, things like that. And a lot can be learned by playing with someone, like sitting next to someone as they play. I'm like, okay, how are you going to handle stress? How are you going to handle pressure? I get to see your problem solving skills come through. And if it's a versus game, how do you handle it, small child, when I kick your butt? Let's see that. Oh, you weren't expecting that. Oh, we've got a little bit of some attitude here. Okay, well, let's talk about why you feel the need to tell me that I'm garbage, even though I beat you. Okay, and so like it's this very in the moment way of processing these emotions, and so just anything across that spectrum. So whether there's a game or not, the fact that I can talk about games, I understand game culture, the fact that clients don't have to explain to me what PAX is, which is the Penny Arcade Expo, which is a giant convention for games. They don't have to explain Gen Con. They don't have to explain mechanics of the game that they enjoy because I get it. And honestly, if there's any clinicians out there, having a genuine interest and getting it is like so much of the work. It's just for them to feel heard and seen and validated. Because typically, when people tell a therapist about a game, a couple things happen. One, that's bad. Games are bad. Don't do that. Two, I don't understand it. Can you explain it to me? And then you spend the entire 50 minutes teaching your therapist about something when you really want help. Um, or they're just told, like, well, that's not important. Like, well, you don't get to decide that. And so encourage all the clinicians out there to just be open, be curious. You don't have to know every game. I certainly don't know every game. It's impossible. But be curious, want to know more, have that genuine positive regard, as we say.
It's kind of like what we said earlier, that's the beauty of being a nerd is when you find other people who, even at the very least, have an interest or have like a basic understanding of whatever that thing it is that you're into. It makes you want to open up. I love when someone, makes an anime reference that I recognize. I'm like, you watch that too? Or, you know, I think the other I think like 2 weeks ago or a few weeks ago I have no concept of time. I told someone at my job that I was going to a concert, and they asked what concert I was going, and it was an artist that is barely anyone really knows. I was like, they're not gonna know who this is, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go see like Still Woozy, and they're like, you listen to Still Woozy? I'm like, you listen to Still Woozy? You know
Oh,
who that is? And it was like a really cool moment. Like it's fun. It makes you want to. It makes you open up more and like, and it makes you feel heard. And I don't know necessarily, like, from what I understand, like you've obviously like worked with like younger clients too, like teenagers. Like I feel like as a teenager, it's so important to find someone who understands what you're into. Because I remember when I was a teenager, I was really into like, and I still listen to it to this day, but I was like really into like metal and punk and post hardcore music.
hmm
And at home, no one understood.
no.
My parents were like, this is weird. This is terrible. Do not play this around me. Don't play this in the car. If you play it in your room, keep it very low. I don't want to hear it. And I would just be like, well, who am I going to talk about this with? I spend most of my time with y'all. I live here.
I live here
I
too.
live. Yeah. So, and then, what, like I would find other people who were also into that kind of music. And I don't know, it nourishes you. So I think that's really cool that you mentioned like just finding that baseline connection. I have a question though, like, gaming, I feel like has changed so much, at least how people experience games now.
Mhm.
Mind you, I'm not a big gamer, but like just seeing the way people experienced it when I was younger versus now, now you have things like Twitch, and we're at this I feel like we're at this point with media consumption where it's not like you can just like enjoy it. People want to make content out of it. So now they
Mhm.
go on Twitch and they talk to other people on Twitch, or like the technology has changed. Do you find yourself, has it been a challenge? Like, cause I know for me, sometimes I'm just like, I don't know. I'm in my late 20s, but sometimes I'll see like younger people and I'm like, I don't know what y'all are into. I don't know what y'all are doing. I don't understand any of this. So like, and I know, so like, have you had that experience of like, I guess like that challenge of trying to keep up with how games are experienced now, and like how have you kind of navigated that?
Oh, I mean, there's always a new game out, and I think one of the nice things about games is that nobody can be on top of it. There there are so many games and people cycle through them so fast. The benefit though is that there are things like let's plays and ways watching Twitch. So if for example, I mean Fortnite's a big thing. Obviously, it's a
Mhm.
huge deal. I have played once or twice because I felt like it was my duty to play it at least once or twice if I'm going to talk about it. And it's not my thing, which is fine. Like games are for everyone, and that doesn't mean that every game is for you. And
Mhm.
but I get why people like it. I get why they enjoy it. And but yeah, it can be, I mean, honestly, games not so much. TikTok, I can't, like, I can see it and I can appreciate it for what it is, but the joke is I'm not talented or pretty enough to be on TikTok, so we're just not gonna do that. Or like Insta, that's another one that just kind of passed me by, and I think it's more about finding your niche and then staying true to that. So I read journals about, video games and things like that. I watch Let's Plays, I watch Twitch streamers. My friend group is filled with other gaming nerds, and so I'm listening to what they're playing and how they're enjoying it, and does that spark my interest? I listen to gaming podcasts, so that way I don't have to know everything. But yeah, the nice thing about games is that at the core, they are play. Like that is the fun. That's what I need to know about. Is we come to games because there is something in them that we want. We get something out of it. And more important to me than the mechanics or the titles is what is that thing that we're getting out of? Or from the design perspective, what is the thing that we're putting forth? So one of my rants that I do, or rants, okay, I'll be nice to myself. Hold on, I'm working on that. One of the presentations that I give is on the representation of mental illness in video games. And it's not good. It's really not good. It's very stigmatized, heavily stereotyped. The homicidal maniac. Why does he want to kill everything? Because he's crazy. And really harmful tropes and things like that. And so being able to talk about games critically of, okay, well, why is he portrayed this way, or why does the killer in this horror game have to be psycho, and why does it have to take place in a psychiatric hospital? And so having those kinds of conversations, I think, are a little bit more evergreen than trying to spot every game as it becomes popular and then is no longer popular and then
Hmm.
popular again. Yeah, trying to keep up with that trend is would be impossible.
It's just more so about getting to the core of it, like understand like the core of it rather than having to like know every major Twitch streamer, brand new game, the next Fortnite kind of thing. Just really just understanding the core of it and why it's important to your clients is what I'm getting out of it, which
I
makes a
mean,
lot of sense.
the fact that I know what Twitch is, even if I don't know their streamer, the fact that they don't have to explain it, because I've had that. So from my own therapist, I was trying to describe to them some of the struggles of being a streamer and a content creator, and they're like, "Well, what is Twitch?" And I'm like, "Oh
Where do we
no."
start?
So what are people are whispering? Why can you just turn it off? And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Okay, no. No, that's not how this works." And so just even the basics, you don't have to know the specifics, but the basics goes so far. And then when the client's not looking, you like Google it really fast. And then in between sessions, you like look up Let's Play. So you kind of go, yes, I understand. Yes. But no, seriously, like doing research on the back end as a clinician is really important to me too. Because if I don't know something, I want to know it. I want to understand it. And part of that is my own research on my end, but also part of it is asking my client to tell me about it. Because what I read on Wikipedia, I might get the gist of what the game is, but that's not why they're playing it. And so, yeah,
Exactly.
again, in the clinical capacity, it's all about the individual, and the games are just the lens through which we discuss things.
And I have like a few more questions. I wanted to, you mentioned like, representation of mental health in video games, and you also, you do some consulting for like game devs.
Yeah.
How did you get into that line of work, and what does that look like?
Okay, so the consultation with game devs. So when I'm not being a therapist, I am the community director at Take This, which is a mental health nonprofit, and it is dedicated to improving mental health and destigmatizing mental illness and mental health challenges in both game player populations as well as studios. So we work with devs as well as players and all the communities in between around mental health stuff. So that is how I've come. Like, I've always wanted to do these consultations with games, but through Take This, I'm actually able to connect with developers and studios and provide that kind of feedback. So I'll play through a game and go, you know what, you probably need a content warning here, or
Mm,
you have body horror, gore, just stuff that people might not want to see. One of my favorite examples is there's a beautiful, brilliant game called What Remains of Edith Finch, and it's just this gorgeous accomplishment artistically. The game mechanics are brilliant, and it's an amazing experience. But in the game, there's one of the chapters where a child dies, and I have two small humans. And before my small humans, it probably wouldn't have bothered me. But now that I have two small humans, it was too much. And like I stopped playing. I had to put the controller down. I just cried. I couldn't do it. Someone else had to play through that part for me so I could finish the game, but I couldn't do it. And so if I had either a warning that was coming or a way to skip it, like just let me pass this vignette. I don't want to be exposed to that. I think there's a big difference to be made there. So helping developers understand that and then prioritize their player well-being when they are playing with things like depression and anxiety and mental illness and like things that are traumatic. There's definitely guideposts that I think would be beneficial for them as well as their players.
yeah, like
Yeah.
remembering too that like the game is meant to be played, like it is play, and like the person ultimately wants to enjoy themselves. So having like giving them that opportunity to be able to like, skip through something that's too heavy, or at least prepare for something is not the same. It is not the same, but it's how I deal with this. Whenever I'm like watching like a horror film and I see like an animal pop up, I instantly Google. I'm like, okay, is this animal gonna die? So that way I can prepare in case, because I have two cats. Like in case I because there was one film I saw that I was not prepared, and I saw something terrible happen to this cat, and I immediately started crying. And I was like, if I had known, I would not have watched this.
So there's
Like,
a website called does the dog die.com.
that's what I
Huge
used.
resource.
Yes.
I mean, I cannot sing their praises enough. Like, I have never seen I Am Legend, thanks to doesthedogdie.com. And there's yeah, I remember House of Cards. So my husband's in politics, and we're like, "Ooh, a political drama, whatever." I made him watch Scandal, so I'm like, "Okay, fine." But in the opening scene, a dog is hit by a car, and I'm like, "Nope, I'm out. I'm out. Mm-mm, I'm not doing this." And so yeah, I think most developers don't they're not intending to hurt the people that they're creating these games for, but I think they do sometimes lose sight of the fact that your players are people, and they have lives and experiences, and they have histories, and a lot of those histories have trauma, and your game can explore really difficult, dense topics. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, from the clinical side, you need informed consent. If you want someone to open up and to be open to experiencing those really intense feelings, you need to get their permission. You need to get their consent first.
Yes.
And so that's a lot of the work I do in that space. And so, but yeah, how I came to it was, take this, scooped me up, which is great because I had been laid off from a previous job. We're like, well, we don't really need you anymore, so bye. I was like, oh, okay. But it worked out great
It's like
because
that's just my livelihood, you know.
yeah, I don't need that. I don't need to feed my children. It's cool. But yeah, so that's where I do that kind of work now, and I really enjoy it. I love working with devs, um, because who better to talk about mental health than a mental health professional who actually understands what a mechanic is, and I can talk about game verbs and juiciness and feel and level design and having that kind of cross. It's almost like being multilingual, of being able to translate,
Yeah.
okay, well, this is what the DSM says. This is what the diagnostical clinical, Bible says. This is what it actually looks like in real life. And this is how you translate that into a game space.
And you have like that perspective that maybe not a lot of other people have. And I think it was really cool too that you brought your own experience in when you played the game. You're like, well, maybe the person that designed the game didn't have kids, and so they didn't have that same kind of connection and things like that. Versus like, so they didn't think about like how this game would be played by someone who does have children. So you kind of brought that perspective that they maybe didn't have, on top of being able to understand like the language and motivations and all the things that go into a game, both as a player and then just like, and I guess like on the development side too. So I think that's really cool. And then
How do
like
you
my final
feel?
question. Yeah, like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, sorry, I go
No,
like,
you're like, yeah,
I
no. I
skip thoughts.
sometimes I gotta pinch myself. Like, how is this what I get to do? So I am so humbled and so grateful that this is where I'm at right now.
And so what advice would you give to someone who, this was a question I had a hard time like verbalizing, but basically it's like, you know, what advice would you have for someone who is maybe trying to do a similar line of work as you, in the sense that they have this passion, whether it's gaming or art or music or theater or what have you, and incorporating that into their work as a psychologist or a therapist and how to connect to clients, like because you faced some backlash. Part of it obviously is because video games have this very unique reputation of being like bad for you and violent and terrible or whatever, that
Yeah.
maybe other like type of passions don't have, but there could still be some pushback that other people could experience trying to incorporate different things. Like, what advice would you have for them?
My number one piece of advice is always just be more stubborn than anybody else in the room. That it purely come from my experience of having had to be like, because if I had taken the advice I had been given by incredibly smart, well-meaning people, I wouldn't be here. I would probably be doing research on games and violence and be miserable. Like, I would not be as happy, and I definitely would not be here. So, kind of understanding what are your values, what is your true north, and sticking with that. The second thing is to find your people. So when I started grad school, it was before Reality Was Broken, which was Jane McGonigal's like kind of culture shifting book around games don't have to be evil; they can actually do good in the world. And so it has come a long, long way. It's not like you can't get a degree in video game psychology right now. But there's media psychology, which is kind of close. And then there's the tabletop and psychology mental health field is exploding with clinicians using Dungeons and Dragons or other role playing type games as clinical interventions. And there's an organization called Game to Grow, which actually trains clinicians on how to use games therapeutically through the use of tabletop, like role playing and things like that, which is absolutely just brilliant. And the people there are absolutely wonderful too, which is always a nice thing to be able to say. And so yeah, find your people because we're out there, and there are groups and organizations. I know on Twitter I have lists of people who are in games and mental health broadly. There's not a ton of us, but there's a lot more than there used to be. So having that connection of someone who's like, oh wait, that person, that's the general direction I want to go. I wonder how they got there. And having somebody to bounce ideas off of and get that information from. Like I wish to this day I still am like looking for a mentor. Like I would love to have a mentor that I could ask questions about. Like how do I do this? I haven't found one, so if anybody wants to be my mentor, let me know. Call me. Uh, but yeah, having people that you can ask those questions, you can be part of that community, whether it's the research side, the clinical side, the dev side, and yeah, that's how the doors open is by having those connections because there's no centralized route. If you want to become a chef, there is kind of like a very carved out route for that. If you want to be a bioengineer, there's a route carved out for that. If you want to do games and mental health, it's both terrifying and so exciting because there is no route, which means you get to make it, which is why it's both terrifying because like, oh my God, who am I to do this? But also so exciting because there's no limit, there's no boundaries. Well, there are boundaries, they're called ethical guidelines, and you should definitely abide by those. But there's no path. You get to chart your own way, which is to me just really, really exciting.
You get to carve your own niche, and that's how you end up on Nerds at Work with TsundEri.
Yay! I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I messaged you. I saw it on Twitter. I'm like, take
when
me.
when you when you I think you had tweeted at me first or emailed me. I know I got an email from you. Either way, when I saw it, I was like, this is exactly what I was looking for. This is what I needed. So when I saw it, I was like, I gotta get on this quick. So, and I'm really happy I did. This was a really informative conversation, and I really appreciate how you broke things down because like I said, like I'm not like a big gamer, so there are a lot of things that I don't know. But the way that you explained it, like I was able to follow along, and I'm so
Oh,
excited for everyone
good.
to hear this. Before we sign off, I just want to ask you: do you have like any websites or channels that you want people to follow you on? Like, where can people find you, basically?
So I pretty much live on Twitter, which by the time this comes out, it might not exist anymore. Who knows?
Who knows?
But on Twitter, you can find me at Kelli N Dunlap, Kelli, the letter N Dunlap. And I hang out there with all my games and mental health homies. So if you follow me and say, "Hey, I heard you on TsundEri's podcast," let me know. I will introduce you to the squad of mental health people that I know that also do games. So I'm always looking to expand that network. For my work, check out dunlappsyd.com. So that's DUNLAPPSYD. Because again, I am a psychologist, not a branding person, and I wish I had thought about that when I was making these handles. I would have made them easier to use. But now I know. But that's where my research, my talks, those kinds of things are as well. And then, of course, check out takethis.org. That is a wonderful resource for, even if you're not a gamer, there are tons of resources around mental health well-being for the geek generalist out there. And if you want to just kind of hang out, Take This does have a Discord that I run as community director. That is part of my job, is I get to run a Discord. And that is discord.gg/takethisorg. And yeah, we're just a bunch of really nerdy people who care a lot about mental health, and we would love to have anybody there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening, I always forget how to introduce my handles. Hold on. um, you can follow TsundEri on Twitter at it's the TsundEri, ITSTHE If you follow me on my old Twitter at the TsundEri, I no longer have access to that because I goofed. So I'm not over there.
Oh
So follow
no.
me on at it's the TsundEri. This it's a long story. But so follow me on at it's the TsundEri for on Twitter, at the TsundEri on Instagram, at the underscore TsundEri on TikTok, and you can also follow my blog tsunderi.com. And I also have a Discord now called Club TsundEri, and I'll include links to that everywhere so that y'all can find me. And I am so excited for y'all to hear this. And thanks for tuning in. And thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here. This was so informative. Like I had a blast. This was great.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me into your space and into your tsundere universe.